Stop thinking about your customers and start thinking like your customers. Not based on what you're trying to achieve, but how you can create value in their lives.
When your customer is in pain, that is your opportunity to create loyalty or lose that customer forever.
There's no such thing as them. There's only you.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast. I have a great guest, Rick DeLisi, with me here today. Here's the thing. Most leaders think that they have a clear picture of how their business is performing. But according to today's guest, 2/3 of them are utterly flying blind, which I don't know. We'll have to discuss this because I'm not even sure people really think they have a clear picture of their business. I'm not sure any founder who's real honest actually does. Rick DeLisi is a 20-year authority on customer experience and the lead analyst researcher at GLIA. And he recently led a landmark study surveying over 1,000 businesses leaders on how they're implementing AI in customer service. This is an area, by the way, that's close to my heart because we are trying to upgrade our own customer experience and customer service at my company, Chore. And it's one of those underappreciated areas in some cases. And so I'm curious what Rick's going to tell me that we're doing wrong. What he uncovered in your research was pretty startling. 86% of executives believe AI is crucial to their future, yet only 27% actually measure its impact, creating obviously a pretty clear, costly disconnect between vision and execution. Rick's findings reveal an urgent paradox. Companies eager to embrace AI-enhanced services are simultaneously suffering ROI losses because of missteps on how you're deploying it. Co-author of the best-selling book, The Effortless Experience, which redefined customer loyalty and helping to make their experience frictionless. And then through your latest work, which I believe is called The Digital Customer Service, Transforming Customer Experience for an On-Screen World. So Rick, it is with a ton of pleasure I have you here on the show today.
Thanks, Adam. It's really fun to be here.
Awesome. So I will kick off with one key question to get started and then dig into what we started talking about right before we got started. And then my general rule, of course, always, Rick, is we just start recording and get into it. Otherwise, you just miss some great conversations. Look, you've worked with and talked to a huge number of entrepreneurs. How do you define entrepreneurial excellence in your mind? What is the definition of that?
I think it really comes down to achieving full and complete customer centricity. Now, every organization, every entrepreneur, everybody says we're customer centric. And the justification or the rationale for feeling this sense of customer centricity is we've spent a lot of time analyzing the marketplace. We spend a lot of time thinking about our customers. We have a 360-degree view inside the heads of our customers. And that all sounds great. But if you're spending most of your time thinking about your customers, you're missing the most important point, which is entrepreneurial excellence is thinking like your customers, not based on what you're trying to achieve, but how you can create value in their lives. And so the journey that I've been on for, dear God, now 2+ decades, has been to truly understand and to help others understand how to be customer-centric by understanding that ultimate expression of loyalty is not based on how great people feel you are or how much they love your product or services, your company or brand, but how smart they feel about themselves as a result of their decision to be your customer in the first place.
I think I get that, but let me try to break it down in my own understanding from what you said, right? So essentially, I want to feel like I'm really smart for making that purchase decision in a sense, right? So when I go tell my friends about the great new restaurant, it's partially to help my friends and hear about a new restaurant, but it's also sort of bragging rights for me to be like, I found this really great, cool new restaurant. You should try it out and check it out. Is that essentially the same thing, but applied to business where you should feel brilliant for getting this really cool new product or tech or whatever your product you're buying?
This sometimes feels like the dark side of human psychology, but the reality is almost everything we do to benefit ourselves, even those things that we do that benefit others. You know, if you put $1 in the kettle for Christmas, that's a lovely thing to do, but you do it at least partially because of how it makes you feel about yourself. And the same thing is true with recommendation. To your point, if you recommend a restaurant, you hope that your friend goes to that restaurant and has a great experience and then comes back and gives you the credit for it, even though all you did was say something. And so recommendation and loyalty come largely from how we feel about ourselves, which is a wonderful thing because as an entrepreneur, if you're creating the kind of experience that helps people feel smarter and better about themselves, invariably that comes back to benefit you. But that's true customer centricity, thinking like your customers.
Okay, dig in on that, right? So like, I think once again, every founder is going to say, an entrepreneur, I do things like my customer. I am my customer. I built this company because I'm solving my own problem that I've had before, right? The best founders always say, I've had this problem. This is why I have this personal connection to the story. Yet clearly your research shows that's not actually the case in many situations. So like, what does that really mean? Like, what does it mean to, how do I make sure I'm acting in a customer-centric way?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that your customers are thinking about you, your products, and your company at a level that's fractional. That's 1/1000% as much as you are thinking about your company.
Sure, but wouldn't I say that anyways, right? Obviously, I'm in my company every day, nonstop, all the time. So almost by definition, they're going to be thinking about it less.
Yes, not just less, but hardly ever if you're willing to be humble about it. And the point of that is to recognize that those exact moments where your customers interact with your company, those are such critical landmark moments. And particularly when this is a service or a support issue, when a customer is coming to you at a specific moment in time, it's for some very specific reason. And your job is to create an experience that has that person feeling like, I got exactly what I needed, and I got it in the fastest, easiest possible way.
Okay, so then how do you go about doing that? Like, what are the steps, right? What does it mean for me as an entrepreneur to go achieve that? Because most companies fail, most founders fail, most entrepreneurs fail. How do I go do that the right way? What does that actually mean to do this in a scientific-based way that you sort of studied?
So based on the research that we did for the book, The Effortless Experience, what we discovered is that the single thought you'd love to have your customers leaving after an interaction with you is, wow, that was a whole lot easier than I thought it would be. Now, some people have questioned whether or not the title is even accurate, The Effortless Experience. Nothing's effortless. Getting out of bed in the morning requires effort, but people will compare their experiences with the company to their expectations going into some kind of a service or support interaction. And what you're hoping is, and what you're going to engineer for, this is a science that we call experience engineering the experience so that it feels like less effort than I thought it was going to be. And what we learned is you can take, as a company, as an entrepreneur, you can take great control over the amount of effort people experience based largely just on things like your words and your attitude. It's astounding how much of an impact you can have just based on the way you communicate with people, whether that's face-to-face or online.
Okay, so I'm smiling for those who are listening. I'm smiling a lot of that because this is something I preach to my team all the time. Communication is so critical. And it's one of these things that are actually, I think, really easy to do, yet it also seems really hard. And what I mean by that is being able to be a good communicator is something we should all be good at this point in our careers. Yet I find that people have real trouble actually doing that communication sometimes to their customers. So is that sort of what you mean? Like, in other words, maybe I'll make it even more clear. From our work at my company, Chore, we are all about we want to respond quickly with a thoughtful answer on a regular basis. And it doesn't always have to be the right answer. It doesn't have to be like, oh, we've solved your problem. It just has to be, we hear you. We're there for you. Yet that's hard for some people we have on our team. And we're trying to engineer around that, essentially. Is that the right mindset? Is that essentially what you're saying? Like, the best companies are the ones that are just responsive, essentially?
Yes, responsive, but responsive in a very particular way. And again, this goes down to the basic psychology that we have as customers. One way to test people is to ask them, what does this term mean? Customer service rep. If you're a customer service rep, what does that mean? And the obvious answer is, well, I'm a representative. What else would it mean? But the follow-up question is, well, who are you representing? And you'll find the vast majority of people say, well, I'm representing the company. I'm a paid employee, and I'm representing the company in this interaction. To which what we learned is, in just a slight change of attitude, what if you not only believe, but were reinforced by your bosses, that your job is to represent that person that you're dealing with? You're actually their representative, not the company's representative. You're being paid by the company to represent that person, to be a partner with them, to guide them through the process that's required to get resolution, to be like a court-appointed attorney or like a Sherpa guide. You're being paid to represent that person and guide them through the system. So it's not you against them, it's you and them against the problem or the system or the man or whatever the obstacle is. That little slight reversal of attitude has a massive impact on both the perception of effort and ultimately that customer's future loyalty.
So what are the steps then to set that up the right way? I mean, like how do companies get this wrong? So what I find a lot is the founder is going to be very responsive in many cases. They're going to be thoughtful and they'll be great. Like CEO and founder will be great at it. And then the further it gets away from that founder and you have someone, once you get to a point you're big enough of a company where you have customer service reps or support reps, many of them feel like it's just a job. They're checking some boxes. And sometimes they're just trying to get off the phone as quick as possible because they either don't want to give you an answer or they feel like their metric is to go as fast as they can. How do companies do it great? Like, what does great look like with these companies?
Great looks like teaching your frontline people how to do their job in a way that's actually easier and more fun for them.
Okay.
So, for example, being an advocate, being on somebody else's side, being paid by your company to represent someone else is way more fun and interesting than being paid to represent the company. Words dramatic.
Say it again. So being paid to be an advocate to help the customer is better than being paid to represent the company in a sense?
Correct. Yes, and here's how that works. There are even specific verbal skills, like, for example, the use of positive language. Why would you ever tell a person what they can't have when you can always just answer the same question by telling a person what they can have? And so, for example, can I have a Coke? Well, we have Pepsi here. You would never say, we don't have Coke. You'd say, we have Pepsi. Well, I want a Coke. Well, here's what we do have. We have Pepsi, we have Mountain Dew, we have Slice, or whatever the other flavors are. Here's what we have, and here's what I'd be happy to provide you. And no matter how many times the person tries to get you to say no, you're always and only going to continue to refer to what that person can have. And the point of that is not just it's better for the customer or the company, but it's way better for you. Because as soon as you tell somebody what they can have or you use the word no, they're immediately going to bristle up, become a little bit more irate, and make your job harder. So again, these techniques of advocacy and being on the customer's side, representing them, using positive language, understanding how your words are going to impact people before you even say them is really best for you. Yeah. And it makes your job easier. And when your job is easier and more fun, invariably the customer's having a better experience.
So what training or what's a heuristic that people should be thinking through to make sure their teams and the people who are doing this work directly with customers are doing right? Like how do we get this right once again? And then also, why, once again, do so many companies fail at this, right? Maybe they just haven't all read your books, but like, why else have they failed? Is it because they just don't know it? They don't have the right training and process? What are the steps to make sure this mindset is inculcated within a company?
Executives and leaders have to recognize that there's only two people involved in every interaction, and you are neither of those people. For all of the multi-billions of dollars that hang in the balance based on a company's overall customer experience and customer relationships, executives and leaders are no part of that at any level. And so this idea that we have to standardize everything and we have to control everything, and our goal is to create consistency in the interactions we have with customers, that kind of top-down thinking makes sense in the boardroom, but it invariably translates to suboptimal interactions in the real world. Every company in the world says, our goal is to create a consistently excellent experience.
Right.
Why is that a terrible idea? It sounds good. It sounds like the right answer. But in reality, when you tell your frontline people, create a consistently excellent experience, that means do the same exact thing and treat everybody in the same exact way, which is the wrong way to create excellent results, because every customer is different, every situation is different, you're different. And so consistently excellent results come from an endless series of customized, personalized interactions that work between the two people who are the only ones in this interaction.
I buy that, but like help me think through how that gets implemented at scale. And so what I mean by that, right, is when you say, okay, well, you can't build, in a sense, the same thing over and over again, that consistent result. What I think about is, well, on the other hand, like the most successful companies have built essentially that consistent result. So
yes, let's be clear. You can create a consistent result by having completely inconsistent interactions with people, meaning that each interaction is customized to the person you're interacting with and the need they have at that moment. So there can't be a direct formula. There can't be a 6-step process map. There can be overarching goals. But again, remember, at the end of the interaction, the number one goal is that that customer or that person leaves the interaction saying, wow, that was way easier than I thought it would be.
Okay. How does that once again like get implemented in reality? So maybe use an example that everyone that would understand, right? Amazon has put in place a goal to have a consistent result of delivery, 2-day deliveries for everyone everywhere in the United States. Right, at a minimum. And that delivery is on time, it's tracked. They've, I'm sure, a ton of metrics around how to exactly do that, what they have to do to get it done. Or a similar example might be, I want to buy a Camry as a car. That Camry is going to be the same every single time. Now, sure, I get to modify a few things like leather or cloth seats and a few other things like that. Generally speaking, it's a consistent result. How does then that get also personalized to some extent to me? And I know this is different. We're talking about product here versus like customer service. And maybe that's the nuance, is you can have a consistent result for your product, but because you're interacting with people when it comes to customer service, it's different. But like, walk me through why those two things are actually probably different.
You talk about customer experience, which again is this amorphous thing that is this big blob of a million touch points and a million individual experiences with your product, the buying journey, the unboxing, if that's a thing, how people use your product, what they use it for, your branding, your colors, your design. All of those things go into this big blob that we call the customer experience. But when it comes to customer loyalty, without question, the interactions that people have with you when they have a specific problem or a need, or what we would generally refer to as customer experience, are the most acute experiences that are part of this overall pie chart. So these need to be thought about separately. The overall customer experience is important, but nothing's more important than the moment that a customer comes to you with a specific problem or an issue. So for example, the Amazon example, I probably had 500 orders with Amazon in the last year or so, but I've never had an interaction with Amazon. I've never had a two-way communication with anybody at that company. And by the way, as part of my overall customer experience, that's great. There's never been a problem or an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens if and when there is? That's what I've been concentrating my career on, is that exact loyalty make or break moment where the customer has to reach back out to you to say something isn't right, or I need help, or you got to provide something that I can't do on my own. Those are the moments that matter the most when it comes to overall loyalty.
Yeah, no, I think, I'm going to maybe restate this, tell me if this is correct, but I think this is sort of the crux of my understanding, is essentially saying like too many founders think that I'm just going to create a great product and that's it. And they forget that the real loyalty piece comes from handling the acute situations, which certainly in an early product phase happen a lot. So early Amazon, there were lots of deliveries that got missed. It didn't happen. And Amazon found ways to deal with that. In most cases, look, every once in a while, I probably have at least as many deliveries as you have over the past year. When I have had issues, I get on customer support with Amazon, and usually they find a way to figure it out, right? If a package gets stolen from my front deck, I could be lying. They don't know. And they say, great, we'll cover it. And they just take care of it. And I'm sure they have metrics they track, other things like that too, in case someone's doing it all the time or something. But like, they found ways to deal with it as they keep improving their product to the point where, in your case, you haven't even had to have an interaction with them anymore. But the key thing, I'm guessing, once again, please, you're the expert. I'm sort of putting this in my mind here. The key thing is when over the past 15 years of you having Amazon or something, they dealt with the problem for you. So you remained a customer, and that gave them time to improve their product to a point where you don't even have negative interactions anymore.
Exactly. And going all the way back to the days of Amazon being a bookseller, for those of us who are old enough to remember that, I feel like the last interaction I had with Amazon was in a situation where I ordered a book and they sent me the same book twice. And I bet you already know what they said when I finally got back to them. What do you want me to do with this extra book? And they said, hey, just give it to somebody. You don't want me to send it back? You're not going to charge me for it? Nah, it was our mistake. You go ahead and just keep it yourself or give it to somebody. That's an effortless experience. And that incident that happened, dear God, I don't know, 15 years ago, continues to help me feel smart about myself every time I place an Amazon order.
The customer experience piece, or when the loyalty is created, is at the acute moment when someone is in pain. When your customer is in pain, and that's when they've reached out, that is your opportunity to create loyalty or probably create or lose that customer forever.
Yeah. And even let's put a slight asterisk on create loyalty, because if a person's already your customer, you don't need to create anything. But what you do need to do is make sure that you're not eroding the loyalty that you've already generated through your products and services.
Yep.
And so the issue really isn't making your customers more loyal. It's ensuring that they aren't becoming more disloyal. And the way to figure out where that could be happening is to ask the question, how much effort was required for you to get what you needed? Not just so that you can feel great about yourself. Look, our effort score is better than ever before, but rather to root out those specific things that are happening that your own customers say is a high effort experience. What are those moments? What are we doing even inadvertently? Or how are we communicating with people that they're perceiving as being high effort? What are we doing that somebody would say, wow, that was way more of a hassle than I thought it would be? What are those situations and those moments? And then going back at a qualitative level and asking your customers, tell us a little bit more about this experience you had. And in fact, we learned something really interesting. I'm sure you're generally familiar with the idea of service recovery, right, Adam? That's where somebody had a bad experience and then somebody, maybe even a manager or an executive, gets on the line or has a communication with somebody saying, look, I know you had a terrible experience. What can we do to repair this relationship?
I've sadly had to do this many times myself in my career as this sort of senior executive.
Here's what we've learned. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but there's a way better approach. And that is to say, and this borrows some of the same understanding of human psychology that NPS, Net Promoter Score, was built around. If you come back to that person and say, look, Adam, I know you had a bad experience. We'd like to learn from what happened to you so that we can prevent that same thing from happening to other people. You get two remarkable results. One is that person is much more likely to share transparently information that you can use and to be far more open about their experience because they don't have to be defensive about the fact that this is just a sales pitch. And number two is you're more likely to be able to retain their business by treating this as a research opportunity instead of as a last-ditch sales approach. So asking the right question and then following up with the people who give you information about what you could be doing better is the pathway to creating this kind of consistently excellent result that every entrepreneur is looking for.
And so just to make sure I understand that, is the for service recovery piece, the real nuance there is asking essentially for feedback on it. So you guys can say like, hey, like, I'm sorry, obviously, I'm sorry you had this situation. We're going to do what we can to make it right. But I would really love feedback on how do we improve it going forward so this never occurs again.
Yes. And again, remember the psychology of the Net Promoter Score question, how likely are you to recommend this to a friend or colleague, isn't really about how much of an advocate you're going to be. It's about, are you going to continue to be loyal to us? But we're asking you based on how your words and behaviors influence other people. And so when a person is put in a position to represent others like them, they're far more likely to be open, transparent, helpful, and at some level also to be willing to continue to do business with you because you asked not just what they thought, but how what they thought can influence others.
So then going back to the question sort of like when the bad experience happened, like how do you identify the things that are high effort experiences in the first place for people?
Simply by asking. Don't assume, don't project. Effort is a completely subjective thing. And I'll share with you in a moment, we learned something about how people assess effort that's even completely different than what we thought when the research was done originally. But it's completely subjective.
Okay. So effort is completely subjective, but when do I ask in the process? So like, let's assume I have a customer who's happy, right? They're not complaining. They don't have many acute experiences, but maybe they're not like they're not ecstatic either. I don't want to fill them with forms like what's high effort or low effort. When do I get that feedback, or do you only get feedback about what's effortful when they have the acute experience, and then you can ask?
Yeah, exactly. The effort question is best and really only well applied right after a service interaction, right after a time that a customer comes to you because they needed something. Now, the NPS question, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague? That's a great question to ask at any time other than right after they had an interaction with you. So the NPS question is best at assessing a person's overall loyalty based on every touch point and the full breadth of their overall customer experience. But the effort question is best applied to that moment where I needed something from you and I reached out directly.
And so the question though, for effort question, just make sure with that very specific, do you say like, what was most effortful about this interaction? Because it's different than service recovery, right? So what is the question you asked to understand effort since it's undefined?
So again, it depends on the application here. If you're talking about just a straight up survey, asking the question how much effort was required, if they say this was a high effort experience, then you'd want to get back to that person and have a far more qualitative, in-depth discussion with them. So don't count on surveys and surveys alone to root cause exactly what's going on, but use your survey, use the quant to inform the qual, which informs the quant. Use people's responses to surveys to determine which people you want to get back to for a far more in-depth discussion where you can iterate 5 or 6 layers deep into not just what the experience was, but how it made that person feel.
Okay. Does that mean like when you think through like going deeper with someone and figure out how it makes them feel, is that then you saying like, hey, like you're trying, like you start asking specific questions? Are there a set of questions you try to ask to really understand how did this make you feel? Like what are the right set of questions to achieve an understanding of their effort for getting a solution?
Yeah. And again, this shouldn't be like a clipboard of standard questions where you wait for the person to stop talking and then you ask the next one. This is an iterative follow-up approach, but you'd start with, tell us about what happened. What was it that you needed? What did you expect would happen? What did happen? How did you feel about the person or people you interacted with? What did you perceive their attitude to be? What was it that seemed harder than you thought? And then ultimately what you want to ask is, how did this experience make you feel about your original decision to be our customer in the first place? And if you can get through those 5 whys or those 5 or 6 layers of the overall experience and its impact on that customer, then you can begin to determine what could we be doing systemically to prevent this kind of thing from happening more frequently.
And how do companies start thinking through how to prevent those things systematically? Is it going back to the Amazon example? It made me think your book example, right? When does a company decide the right decision is let Rick keep the book versus saying, hey, we want you to send it back? Is it because it's a book and it's the cost for Amazon probably had some numbers and said, well, the cost to ship it back and restock it and all these things are way too high. It's just not worth it. But if it's a $5,000 TV, like, okay, Rick, you can send it back and like, we'll cover the shipping. Like, how does a company decide at what point you resolve the problem and just give the customer, make it really easy versus saying, hey, we got to make it more difficult because it's too expensive? Or is that even the right frame of thinking?
Yeah, well, obviously, the economic scale is completely dependent on the industry and the company. Are we talking about whether or not I continue to buy your can of soup in the grocery store or your luxury vehicle the next time I do business with you? So scope and scale matter a lot in this regard. But remember, you have to ask yourself, what's the cost of losing this customer? If they had an experience that was bad enough or high effort enough for them to think about doing business with somebody else next time, what's that worth to you? So the economics obviously are very situational, but you have to weigh the cost of trying to create a more effortless experience, not just for this customer, but others who have the same exact situation versus the cost of losing them.
Okay, fair. So then when you think through how this has been applied at the companies you've worked with in a lot of your research, has it been met with a lot of skepticism? Have you seen people really do this the right way? Have you seen over the years, everyone's improved on customer loyalty? Because I mean, in some cases, I have fewer interactions with customer service than I ever have. Maybe just all products have gotten better. But what has changed over time? Because once again, your research is pretty recent and it still shows people don't have this figured out.
What we see all too often is that people interpret effort through a completely left brain logical lens of the things we make customers do. Like, even when we first came to recognize this correlation between how people answer a given question on a survey and what they end up doing behaviorally going forward, we assumed at first, and maybe anybody who's listening to this for the first time would assume that effort is based largely on what customers have to do. How many things I had to do to get my problem resolved, how long it took, how hard it was to do those things. Effort is mostly what a person has to do. That's what we thought too at first. But when we did a follow-up study to understand at a psychological level how people answer the question, how much effort was required, what we learned is that what people have to do comprises only, and it was exactly 34.6% of how people perceive effort. The other 2/3 was how the whole thing made me feel. And when you come to recognize that you as a company have so much control over how experiences feel to your customers, it's both easier and much less expensive to improve effort. So rather than thinking about, let's go through a whole process examination, or let's do a whole Six Sigma thing and try to reduce process steps or friction between steps. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But those things tend to be really expensive and time consuming. But when you realize words and attitude matter twice as much, and that you as a company can have almost complete control over how an experience feels to a customer, those things are far more impactful, and those are things you could do immediately. You're the customer service rep, and as a customer's explaining their issue to you, this is going to be somewhat of a hassle. There's multiple steps that have to go through. We can't resolve this immediately. There's a couple things that have to happen. I might have to reach out to somebody else in the company, or there's going to be some time delay between now and being able to give this customer what they need. If you say to the customer, hey, look, I know this seems like a big hassle, and I get it, but we've helped thousands of other people who have the same problem, and we've found the fastest and easiest way to get through this whole process. So let's work together and do that. How's that sound to you? To which 100% of people say, that sounds great. Then you could do exactly what you would have done otherwise, the same exact steps, the same exact hassle, the same exact time. But because you've explained to the person, we've determined the fastest and easiest way, and we're going to work together to do that, invariably, at the end, the customer will say, wow, that was way less of a hassle than I thought.
To make sure I understand it then, so when I totally agree with that, but is the correct step, the thing that the company needs to do is in the language of how they explain, this is the problem, this is how we suggest dealing with it, and essentially get buy-in from the customer, in agreement that that's what's going to happen, versus what is the alternative? What used to happen?
Certainly, sir. What's your account number? Here are the things that you have to do now. You have to get this information. You have to provide us with this. You have to do the follow. It always comes back to, wait a minute, now suddenly you're telling me to do a bunch of stuff versus we're working on it together, versus we're a team.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I love some of this stuff because it's actually very confirmatory to some of the things we're trying to do with my own company, but so many companies seem to fail this still. Why, once again, at big companies, and maybe Glia is a good example. I think you guys have a few hundred employees at Glia when I was looking earlier. Why don't companies get this right? Or what did they mess up or miss in doing that? Or why do they have customer support reps who just say, okay, sir, this is what we'll do to take care of it. And it becomes that frustrating experience.
Yeah, again, it's this idea of control. It's the idea that we as a company need to control our interactions with customers, our own people, our own processes, and that sense of we need to be in control belies the fact that every customer is ultimately in control of their own future decisions about whether or not to do business with you. And so trying to systemize this, trying to, measure people's performance on whether or not they adhere to our exact rules and standards is the wrong way to go about business, because if you don't trust your people, then they become robots. If you're trying to force people into operating exactly the way you tell them they should for every interaction, it misses the fact that every customer in every situation is different. I'll give you an example. Not so long ago, I went into the Apple store with my son, and the person we were talking to was like a 21-year-old kid. If this kid was 22, he wasn't a day over 22.
Yep.
And the interaction that we had was so natural and it was so effortless that at the end of it, I said to him, hey, I don't mean to make too big of a deal out of it, but look, my career has been based on studying customer experience. I said, do they just let you use your own natural personality when you're interacting with customers? And the kid looked at me and he said, no, sir, my boss insists upon it. That was profound.
Yeah. So
insisting that people be genuine human beings instead of service robots. And again, operating in a contact center or a call center environment where you're doing 50 or 100 repetitive calls over and over and over again, you have to be reminded to be a human being.
Totally. How do you measure the net? So how does Apple measure that this kid is a success? Like what they're supposed to be, how does this kid's manager measure this kid as a success? And obviously the same thing applies to every company, right? If you want it, you need something to track to know your team is doing a good job on the metrics you care about, such as customer delight or whatever else you're focused on.
And again, the only way to measure it is to ask the customer. And again, we believe the best question to ask your customer is, how much effort was required for you to get what you needed? And I would have said that experience was effortless, even though it took a few minutes and even though there were steps, because this person was very natural with us. He was very much on our side. He used positive language. We worked together as a team. He guided us through the process, and he acknowledged the fact that we needed help and that he was there to work with us to get what we needed. So the only way to measure success is to ask the customer, but you have to ask the right question and you have to ask it at the right time.
Do you think Apple's so why is Apple, it's a good example, right? So part of what makes Apple unique it's unfortunate that they're unique. I think that's why. Tell me if I'm right about this, but their uniqueness is that they insist on customer delight on a regular basis in everything they do. And they're willing to spend money to achieve that. And whereas most companies are saying, I'm going to cut costs, I want to cut back on expenses, and therefore I'm going to find ways to make my team more efficient, but actually reduce the customer experience. Instead, Apple's like, okay, we're going to service Rick and his son and make sure they're happy. But that doesn't mean you're necessarily solved your problem. That I don't know what doesn't mean you solved the problem today. It doesn't mean you bought a new phone that day. It just means you now become a loyal Apple customer. So a year from now, you might go buy another phone. They can't measure that back to that experience with that kid in the Apple store. At least I don't think they can. Maybe they can, but they probably can't measure that back to that great experience you had a year ago. But something has imbued the Apple organization with saying, we want absolute delight on everything we do in our devices itself and with the interactions that we have. And that will lead to this compounding effect of us actually having great margins instead of the alternative that most companies think about of like cutting costs to achieve margins.
Well, it's important to note that the concept of delight really needs to be rethought.
Oh, please, Kama. This is a key for area for us. So why does it need to be rethought?
Because delight should come from your products and how people enjoy using them.
Totally. Yep.
But delight is not the right goal when it comes to serving people who have problems or issues. Before the book, The Effortless Experience came out, we wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review called Stop Trying to Delight Your Customers. Because what we learned is the strategy of trying to delight people every time you have an interaction with them is bound to fail an overwhelming percentage of time. Customer expectations or creating delightful moments only occur at something like a 10 to 15% rate, which means 85% of time you're not delighting customers. But that's not what really matters when it comes to maintaining long-term loyalty. What you really need to do, again, is to have people leaving an experience feeling like, wow, that was way less of a hassle than I thought. That's different from delighting people. And so sometimes people would say, oh yeah, I remember that piece you did for HBR called Stop Delighting Your Customers. We never said that. We never said don't delight people. But what we learned is the strategy of feeling like you have to delight every customer in service interactions is bound to fail. The delight should come from what you do and what you make, not how you serve people. When you serve people with an effortless experience, they forget that the bad thing ever happened. It's just, they go right back to being the same loyal customer they ever were before. And that's what you want.
So once again, the key thing is in service, it should be about effortlessness. I want it to feel effortless. In your product, it should be delight. And the more delightful your product, the fewer service situations probably come up, of course. And that's where you just need to keep improving. I definitely know from my own experience, it's a really difficult nuance for people to understand. So what are the best companies? How do they manage those pieces? Like what, as an entrepreneur, how do I make sure I'm getting a good balance between those two? Because sometimes, like, let's say your company's doing really well, you built a good product, people want to use it, but it's breaking all the time. And next thing you know, you're focused, spending all of your time dealing with service issues and not enough time making the product more delightful. How do you try to balance that?
Well, one thing that a lot of companies could do a better job of is understanding that there's no such thing as a product failure. Now, what do I mean by that? Because in the mind of the customer, if the product fails, they reach out to the company, and then their future loyalty will be determined based on how the service team reacts to that failure. So ultimately, everything is a service issue, even a product failure. So, if something breaks, I'm not going to base my future loyalty based on the fact that the product breaks. It's that you didn't create an effortless experience for me to help me get my product back on track or to replace it. So ultimately, everything is filtered through the psychology of service.
Okay. So just filter through that. And then are there founders or companies, maybe Apple is a good example of this still, that just do this really well? And then are there founders who don't get it? Like when do people don't understand this? And does that lead to their company failing? Like, is this an area where if you don't get customer success or service right over time, it actually leads to failure?
Customer acquisition and customer loyalty are two completely different things. So when they get conflated, that's when things can go off the rail. Marketing is completely different from service. And here's an example. Like one of the big goals in marketing is mind share, right? Like how often can we get people to be thinking about us? And how can we get them to think about us more deeply when they are thinking about us? Isn't the goal of a service interaction the exact opposite of mind share? In other words, as soon as you can fully resolve a person's issue in an effortless way, now they're no longer thinking about you at all. And they're certainly no longer thinking about the problem. And so the goals are completely reversed. Marketing wants you to be thinking about us. Service is trying to get you to the point where you can stop thinking about us. Mm-hmm. And those two are often conflated and sometimes operated by the same team of people who are ultimately at like 180-degree polar differences in expected outcomes.
Okay, makes sense too. And then how do you deal with like the big thing coming, or it's already here, right? Which is AI. in this conversation, we've talked about how you want to have a personalized experience. Everybody's different. You need to feel like you're in it. And yet AI is here to take every customer service job. I mean, I'm obviously being hyperbolic, but like that's sort of what people talk about and see, that I can have an AI chatbot that in many cases, by the way, can be better than a bad service rep or frankly bad person. You name the role. Better than a bad executive coach, better than a bad therapist, better than a bad girlfriend or boyfriend or something like that, right? Like literally AI can be better than that and give you something that seems more personal. So how are you advising companies to deal with this coming onslaught of AI and automation in those pieces and still achieve effortless CX?
Here's the thing. For companies that are looking to replace humans, that's exactly the wrong thing to be thinking about. Any organization that is thinking we can automate everything is already making a huge mistake.
Yep.
But to assume we can never let AI automate anything is an equal mistake. Well, this next generation of AI in customer service, and again, pioneered by our company Glia, is about recognizing at the outset, the exact moment where a customer is reaching out to you, is their need, the specific issue that they have right now, is it one that can be immediately resolved through automation? Or does it require a human being? And can we then seamlessly transition that person from the virtual assistant to the live assistant, who is then that live assistant being aided by agent-facing AI tools that makes their job easier and more efficient? Let me give you an example. We deal primarily with banks and credit unions. Something like 50% of all the calls and online interactions that customers have with their bank or credit union is for simple, repetitive, quotidian issues. Check my balance. Did this check clear? What's your routing number? Those kinds of things could be immediately resolved with virtual assistants and should be.
And it's probably even a better experience because you can get a fast, immediate response.
Exactly. And by the way, even customers who would say, I don't like AI, I hate bots, I don't trust it. Those same people, if you ask them in a survey, do you like AI? And they say no. If you ask as a follow-up question, do you like getting instant answers to simple questions? They would say yes. So like a total contradiction. But yes, if your need can be immediately resolved through virtual assistants, that's what's presented to you. Now, if you still want to talk to a human, there's always a way to do that. But why would you want to if you got exactly what you needed? I did an interview recently with a woman who's head of customer experience for a bank in Connecticut, and she said, this really stuck with me. There's no inherent value in hearing your balance from a human than through a virtual assistant. However, again, for issues that are more complex, that have an emotional component to them, where the customer would be way better served by having an interaction with a human being, being able to immediately transition that person to a live human, but a person who already knows who you are and knows what your issue is. It's a completely different experience because the live human should never say, hi, I'm Rick, how may I help you? Versus, hey, Mr. Spector, looks like you're trying to apply for an auto loan. I could totally help you with that. In fact, I've already started the process. When the agent knows who this person is and knows what their issue is, it's like they're already on your side. They're already your advocate. They're already teamed up with you to help you get whatever you need in the most effortless way. And that is the glory of this generation of AI, is that it works not only in terms of automating simple issues for customers who have a routine need, but it greatly aids the interaction of the live human being who you're then seamlessly transitioned to in situations where that makes sense.
So why a variety of questions here, but one, it made me think of a personal experience that I've had, and you probably have too, where I will go to an online customer experience and they'll say, hey, you need to verify yourself. I give all my information to verify myself. And then oh, I still need to talk to a human. We're transferring you to a human. And then the person's like, hey, Mr. Spector, can you please verify yourself? I'm like, I literally just did that with your automation system. Why the heck am I wasting my time re-verifying?
Just did that. So
it makes me angry already. And now I'm already in a pissed off mood to start with. Why would companies do that?
because they're thinking about their own concerns, like, authentication, like preventing fraud. Every potential customer is a potential fraudster. I get it. And so either don't force a person to authenticate themselves who already has, or if you must do that, if there's some technological or systemic reason why you must ask a person to revalidate or re-authenticate, the effortless way to do it is, hey, Mr. Spector, I know you just gave all your information, but would you mind just for your own security repeating it real fast?
Yeah, that seems like a much better, you're right. That's a simple way of solving it.
Right.
So essentially what you're saying, because at least my take when I see this is like, it's essentially laziness by these companies. They haven't thought deeply enough about how to, and just to repeat something you've said before, maybe it's worth repeating a bunch in this call, they haven't put themselves in the customer's shoes. They're thinking from their own worldview of we need to protect from fraud versus I need to make my customer have an effortless experience to make them loyal.
Let me ask you, when somebody asks you authentication questions, does that benefit you? Now you can say, well, of course it does, because this way they know I'm me and it's not some fraudster. But the reality is you already know it's you. Mm-hmm. So authentication really, at the level of how it feels quite company-centric. They're just trying to protect their butt. I already know I'm me. You don't have to ask me 10 questions.
Yep.
But if those questions need to be asked, there's always a more effortless way to do it. And in fact, the chapter in our book about this science called experience engineering, creating experiences that feel like less effort, even if the same number of steps need to be followed. The chapter is called Just Because There's Nothing You Can Do Doesn't Mean There's Nothing You Can Do. Mm-hmm. There's always something you can do based on words and attitude that make even something that would feel like a lot of effort feel like less effort.
And this is it's so cheap to do this. Like, it doesn't cost a lot. Plus, you love just that.
Not only does it not cost anything, it actually helps your employee feel better about themselves. And so you're enhancing their experience as well. Now, think about it this way. Like, great experiences that you've had, whether it's a server in a restaurant or a bar, somebody at the Genius Bar at the Apple Store, somebody at your car dealership, anybody you've ever dealt with who's going to help you solve a problem, even a doctor or a nurse. Wouldn't you say that the best experiences come when you're dealing with someone who really enjoys doing what they're doing? Mm-hmm. That if they're having fun, if they love their job, if they really enjoy helping you, then that experience is invariably going to be better for you. And so shouldn't companies be spending a little bit more time thinking about whether or not their frontline people, arguably the most important people in the organization, whether they're really enjoying their jobs? And by enabling people to use their natural personality, by helping them understand the psychology of effortlessness, of making sure it's really clear your job is to represent that person, then that person is having more fun. And if you're having more fun, it's going to be a better experience for the customer. Full stop.
Yeah. So why do companies once again fail at this? So to Glea's credit, they have you employed and they obviously care about this stuff. But I'm guessing if I said, hey, Rick, how many times over the course of the year or quarter even has the Glia CX team or management team said, Rick, we appreciate your studies. We're going to go in a different direction and ignore that. Or they forget these things about just changing language. How often does that happen? And why do you think that happens in organizations? Since this seems straightforward, yet most companies and people who are experts, I'm not an expert at customer service, yet most customer service people I've interviewed and we've thought about hiring people at my company don't talk in this way. Why don't they think about it this way?
Yeah, because again, this idea that compliance and conformity equals consistency sounds correct. And logically, it feels like it would be true. And that it's scary to think that, we have all these people who are out there in the real world, whether that's out in the field, whether that's on the floor, whether that's in the call center, who are the only ones who are truly interacting with our customers. In the dark of night, that's a scary thing. It seems uncontrollable. It seems like we've got to try to wrangle this workforce. So we have to try to processize things so that we don't have random results. And yet the reality is that every human interaction is random to some extent. It's two unique people, again, the only two people who are in the interaction. And the more you try to control those people, the less you are able to provide that consistently excellent result, which every company says is their goal.
Is there a way to, how do companies scale this up properly? So I was just thinking about a situation where we are actually looking at using different tools for our own customer success tools, right? How do we track this? How do we give people quick responses in a variety of different places? The product we are using and testing, their customer service is terrible. Like we've tried contacting them and we haven't heard back from them. It is very frustrating now because we like the product. So clearly they have an issue with either training their team or getting the right people on board. How do companies make sure they have the right type of people? Is there a certain type of people you should hire for these roles? What does that person look like? And then how do you make sure you have a consistent enough flow of high quality people who stick around in these roles to build a successful customer service organization?
Yeah, that's cool. That's actually 3 questions embedded in one, like a Russian.
I'd ask a lot.
That's fine. Who are the right people? What is it that you're trying to hope to provide them? And then how does that create long-term success? Well, what we've learned is that virtually every company tries to hire people for frontline service positions who are empathetic. But what does that mean exactly? And we've learned in recent studies that there's a new form of empathy. And that is, instead of to, use soft skills and pat a person on the head and say, oh, we're so sorry that you had this problem. What you really need is people who are large and in charge, people who are confident, and people who take control or ownership over situation. I worked in the airline business for a little while, and we used to play a game called What Would You Say? What would you say to a person who's been on hold and in the queue for more than an hour, which is astronomical in some industries, but not all that uncommon in the airline industry, where there could be a flight delay or multiple system delays, bad weather, planes out of service, issues with aircraft, that kind of thing. The best person I ever worked with would speak to somebody and say, hey, look, I know you've been on hold for an hour, and I bet that sucked. But luckily, you got me, and I'm the best person here, so let's work together to solve your problem. Talk about a disarming approach. Acknowledgement, understanding, moving forward towards solution. For example, I personally think, and I know this is a controversial point, I don't think companies should ever apologize to people. Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Now, I get that there's a counterpoint that that's a more human approach, but at a psychological level, when you're apologizing for something, you're focusing in a backward-looking direction. You're focusing on the problem. The new empathy is moving immediately toward the solution. It's not a matter of what happened. It's a matter of what we're going to do going forward. So moving immediately toward the solution, acknowledging that there's a problem and immediately offering solutions or moving in an effortless advocacy pathway toward solution. That's what real empathy feels like in today's world. Not just, oh, I'm so sorry this happened to you, but hey, look, I get that's a terrible thing. Let's solve the problem. That works so much better.
Yeah, I know it's fascinating. I actually would say in some ways saying I'm so sorry is, especially for a problem you created, essentially, as the company, feels paternalistic isn't the right term, but it feels, it doesn't make you feel good because it's like, no, if you're really sorry, why did you create the problem in the first place that I need to call you?
Yeah, I think maybe the term is patronizing.
Patronizing, thank you. That is exactly the term. Yes.
And, I can think of a recent service experience that I had where the woman I was talking to apologized like 7 times in a minute. And it was, first of all, completely insincere because you can't be sincere when you're dealing with hundreds of customers over and over and over again. You can't. That apology comes off as so hollow and as if somehow it's like a defense mechanism. Well, I said I'm sorry, so therefore you can't blame us for the problem. That's not true.
Yeah.
But when you're moving forward toward the solution, when you own the person's problem, look, this is a bad thing that happened to you, and we're going to work together to fix it. That's what feels effortless to people. And that's what maintains the loyalty of a person who you worked so hard to get to be a customer in the first place.
So when you think through, so to obviously agree, when you think through the differences between early stage companies that do this well and bigger companies who either do it well or poorly, what are some of the biggest differences between those?
Well, again, in the early stage, there's a minimum number of people who are interacting directly with customers. And there's this sense that every customer interaction is a true learning opportunity. As you start to scale up, now you have more people, they're further afield. You may have a couple of examples of hiring people who don't work out so well. Now you feel like you have to overcorrect for that. I get it. And then you start establishing more strict policies and procedures. And what ends up happening is that, especially in customer service, employees are graded or rated based on adherence and compliance rather than on their people skills or their natural ability to help others feel like we're on their side. As an example, I mentioned that lady from the airline call center. Although she was exceptionally good with people and extraordinarily intuitive and was able to plug into the wavelength of customers at a very high level, she would have been considered not a great employee because she didn't always show up on time and she wasn't a rule follower. And she probably didn't do her post-call notes as well or efficiently as others. And so separating out the people talent from the employee adherence is an important distinction. And maybe in some cases, as long as people's behavior isn't so egregious that it's disruptive or just outright afoul of the rules, it's still a people business. Customer service is still one person interacting with another person. And finding and supporting people's natural inclinations to be helpful and to be an advocate for that person is as important as following the rules and showing up on time.
Going back to, we've sort of asked it, but I want to make sure I really understand it. So how do you really measure the best people in this space? How do you really understand and measure that? And then how do you hire for that? What are the questions you ask for? How do you identify those people who have that ownership mindset?
Yeah, we call these people controllers. Now, again, that seems like it has a negative connotation, and it might in the scheme of a person's overall personality, but when you have a problem or an issue, you want to talk to somebody who grabs you by the wrist and says, come with me, I've got the solution, and we're going to work together to solve this problem. The one question that we determined, this is a conversational thing, and there's maybe different ways to get at it. But what we learned is that people who have this personality characteristic always answered the following question in a very consistent way. And the question is the Disney World scenario. So the scenario is you are at the foot of Main Street, USA with your whole extended family, 30 people, grandma, grandpa, kids, babies, the whole family is together at Disney World. And at the moment you arrive there, you realize there's really not a plan. Like there's no strategy. We're excited to be here, but we don't really know where to go or what to do. What would you do if you were in that situation? And people who have this controller, large and in charge, ownership of the problem situation would either say, well, I would immediately make a plan. If no one else is making a plan, I'll make the plan. And the best answer is that would never happen because I would already realize before we got there that we didn't have a plan and I already would have made a plan.
Yeah.
So it's that type of person who recognizes, in a vacuum, I'll take charge and control, not to be a domineering jerk, but to solve the problem of everybody else doesn't know what to do. So I'll provide us with the guidance and push us through to the solution or the outcome we're looking for.
So I don't know if this was ever officially a archetype of a person, but I studied sort of personal psychology, like human psychology in college as one of my majors. And I would describe myself to my professor, because that's what are you like, as a reluctant leader. And so what that was actually very, very much what you just described. It was the person who would say like, okay, no one else is stepping up. I don't want to be this domineering person who's just always going to go and do it. But if no one else is stepping up, I'm going to go do it and I'm going to take charge and here are the steps we're going to follow. And I would consistently do that. And I still think I do. I'm probably a little bit more dominant than I used to be just because CEO of a company and you just kind of have to be and things like that. But yeah, that's very much the mindset that I used to have as well.
Now, picture this. When we first shared that idea with Fortune 500 companies, a lot of leaders of contact centers and big customer service operations said, "Boy, that sounds great, but I sure wouldn't want to have a whole team of people who have that same personality because I bet it's hard for them to get along with each other. And like suddenly now there's a fight for control on the floor of the contact center, or these people sound like they wouldn't be as compliant, or they'd be more likely to bend the rules, that kind of thing." And the reality is that's such a company-centric way of looking at things, because you as a customer have no perception of customer service as being part of a team. You don't know anything about anybody except the one person you're interacting with. So to treat your customer service team like they're a team, they're really not. At the moment of truth, it's each individual person having an individual interaction with an individual customer.
Yeah, that's a great point. They're a team, maybe in some ways of a little bit of training and understanding, but in the end, they're dealing with a one-on-one interaction, and their success is based on their ability to control that interaction and achieve an effortless outcome.
Now, let me go one step further here. In the world of AI, in this generation of agent-facing AI, the system is learning from the interactions every single agent has with every single customer and constantly assessing what is the best way to help people who have this unique problem. And so in many ways, it allows the benefits of a team, which is best practice sharing and learning from each other and constant peer support, without the necessity of having all these team meetings or kumbaya, or everybody needs to come together. And if you have people who are larger personalities or more likely to have potential conflicts with others who they see also having a large personality, none of those things matter, because you still get all the benefits of peer sharing and best practice without belying the fact that it's still a one-on-one sport at the moment of truth.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And this is for one thing, for what I'm thinking about in my own life, but I think most founders, a very important distinction is how much does the software you run your customer service on matter, if at all?
It matters huge. And here's one of the other things.
To the opposite.
Absolutely. One of the things that we learned is that the hallmark, one of the significant tells or leading indicators of companies that provide a great low-effort experience to their customers is their employees' response to the question, is your company doing everything it can to set you up for success in your interactions with your customers? So ultimately, that's employee effort. And what we learned is low employee effort translates directly to low customer effort, which translates directly to high customer loyalty. So creating an environment in which it's very clear that the company is giving you not just the right guidance, but the right tools and the right technology to enable you to have these consistently effortless experiences with customers matters at a huge degree. And there's a clear straight line between all three of those outcomes: employee effort, customer loyalty.
Okay, so that now you described that way makes sense. Then how do I identify the right tools for that? So to give you an example, by the way, like my team, we use Slack for a lot of our communication with our clients. And so that's where our communication goes through. We need to do some different things in the back end to track some of that stuff and help you get the right answers at the right time. What is that? How do we identify the right tool? Because you go do a search, customer service software, and there's 50 companies that come up. They all sound great. They all claim to do the same things. How do you actually identify what is going to be a low effort tool for your team?
I mean, I know this sounds so circular, but you have to ask the same question of your employees. Like, what are we doing as a company that seems like unnecessary effort to you? What are the things that you have to do every day that feel like a big hassle? Which tools that you're using right now make it feel like it's more trouble than it's worth? Now, again, if you're starting with a baseline of an existing suite of tools, you can assess them versus competitors. If you're starting from scratch as an entrepreneur, it's a little bit tougher, but you're going to have to at least field test a few things, but field test them through the lens of, does this make my employees feel like they get what they need in the fastest and easiest way? Or are there things that they would describe as unnecessary high effort?
Yeah. And I mean, that's maybe a question every company should be asking on a regular basis, right? Is sort of what are the things that are high effort for you, taking a long time in general in your work day to day? But there's always trade-offs, right? So I'll give you one example for our own company, and I'm kind of curious your take on this. Like we need to track the time we put into all the different tasks we do, because we want to know how long it's taking. We want to know where people are spending their time. I know our team would probably say that's a high effort ask to write, even though it built into the software we use. It takes 10 seconds, 20 minutes, quick note, I did this work for this 20 minutes. And boom, good, it's saved, it's done within the task itself. Yet people, I think, feel like it is a unnecessary task. Should we not have that because it's extra effort? But also we feel like we get value from it, but is that just a management perspective and incorrect from the team perspective?
I mean, if you're going to ask somebody to do something that they would naturally perceive as high effort, you have to ask, why would they want to do it? Other than because if I don't, you're going to fire me. That motivation never seems to work in the long run.
Of course.
Is there a whiffum to the employee for doing time tracking? And is this something that we're just doing for a brief period so that we can get a snapshot of things that we could be doing to make your job easier? Why are you asking me to do this and what do I get out of it? Not why do I have to do this because I don't want to? It's like, what could you share with me that would have me wanting to do it because I see it as being in my benefit?
Yeah, that's a great point in rethinking, like make it for someone to benefit, and in a sense, put yourself in what's in the shoes of the customer. In that case, it's the customer being the employee. If you were starting a company from scratch today, how and when would you start thinking about customer success, customer centricity, the right software, the right tools, the methods for doing all of this? Like, I feel like a lot of customer success just sort of happens the moment you get your first customer. You suddenly start dealing with customer success as a founder, but it takes a long time to actually put tools and processes in place to actually really succeed there, but maybe it shouldn't. And so sort of when would you start thinking about this as a founder?
There's no time like the present. I mean, at the first moment of writing a business plan on the back of a cocktail napkin, if you're not already thinking about how we can create a product that delights people and service interactions that feel effortless to people, you're never going to be able to catch up to that later.
Yeah.
This has to be embedded in the initial business plan, the initial design. If all you're thinking about is, what can we do that's different and is it going to make us money? You're going to end up chasing your tail later down the road. Like, this is the most fundamental thing you can be thinking about at the outset. And frankly, it's easier to engineer this into the fabric of your initial startup plan than it is to somehow reverse engineer it months or years down the road.
Are there good examples of companies that have reverse engineered it and fixed it and turned it around?
Yeah, there certainly are examples of companies that take a moment to say, wait a minute, like, where are we introducing unnecessary complexity? Where are we introducing high effort experiences that we don't even realize? I won't mention the name, but a big insurance company we worked with started a program called Capture the No's. And they said to all their frontline people, every time you have to say no to somebody, we're not asking you to do anything different. Don't change what you're doing, but just make a note of it. And we'll have somebody come around once a week and ask you, how many times did you have to say no to somebody? And then let's look and see, did we really need to say no? First of all, could we have expressed that using positive language somehow? And is the no actually the result of some policy that we could rethink, or maybe was just put in place because it was an overreaction to some negative thing that happened years ago? Are we saying no because that's what we absolutely need to say, or are we just used to saying it? So there's always a way, even in a seemingly mature company, to continue to re-ask, what are we doing that's creating unnecessary effort? And are those things actually required, or could we rethink how we approach those? And even if we can't, just because there's nothing you can do doesn't mean there's nothing you could do. Is there a different way that we could express this to people so that it at least feels to some degree like it's to their benefit?
What about leadership style? Is there a specific leadership style from a founder leader is really is a good leadership style for being a real customer centric type of business?
Man, I'm so glad you asked that question because it was a light bulb moment for me. And during a study on employee effort, where I had a chance to embed with a wide variety of companies, including ultimately Glia, the company I work with right now, I came to recognize that leadership at all levels of companies that have these great high loyalty, low effort experiences on a consistent basis with customers have one quality in common, expressed in many different ways, but it is the quality of humility.
What's the outcome of having a high humility culture?
Where leaders are mostly asking questions instead of saying things, where leaders recognize their role is to set their people up for success, particularly their frontline people, and where the goal of being an executive is to ensure that everyone who reports to you and then everyone who reports to them and on down the org chart you go, everyone is being put in the best position to succeed and to provide feedback whenever anything that they're being asked to do is counter to that or creates unnecessary effort. So it's that humility of being willing to recognize that you don't know everything and that it's real clear what the goals are, but that you're enabling your people at every level to find the right pathway to achieve those goals in ways that feel natural to them.
How does that work? So using an example so Elon Musk is, forget his politics for a second, but as an entrepreneur, he's clearly a fantastic entrepreneur, right? He's built multiple very successful companies that have really changed things. I also don't think many people would view him as as someone who has a lot of humility, but maybe you would argue when it comes to his companies, he does. He asks a lot of questions. He goes very deep, and empowers his people to figure out solutions. So how do you think through people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs or these sort of iconic entrepreneurs? Were they these sorts of people? I mean, I guess they maybe were in a weird way, maybe not humility as an individual, but built organizations that were high humility.
Yeah. And again, like the term humility can come across as like always putting yourself in a position of being subordinate to someone else, or you tell me what we should do, or I don't want to, be overbearing. Humility is largely the product of curiosity. And I think that's the thing that you could say that all of those entrepreneurs that you mentioned from Musk on down, they're intensely curious people. And so curious people, again, ask a lot of questions and are never completely satisfied that they've entirely determined what the right answer is, and that you never know where the next best suggestion is going to come from. And there is a certain humility in recognizing that the farther away you are from daily contact with customers, the less you really know.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea that, if I live in an executive bubble and I'm not constantly touching base with people who are dealing directly with our customers, and even to some extent with our customers, I'm probably missing something. I'll give you another example. The company Electronic Arts, EA Sports, we know them as a video game manufacturer. And for years, they tried to preach customer centricity by enabling their frontline people to have direct contact. Their non-frontline people to have direct contact with customers, like walk a mile in our shoes, or like you can side jack in the contact center or go out to a retail store and hear what questions real customers are asking. And that is a good idea, and it's way better than nothing. But they modified it slightly, and this produced far better results. What they said was, what we'd really like you to do is to understand what it's like to be a frontline employee. And rather than being customer-centric, if your job isn't directly customer-facing, you should be customer-facing employee-centric. Recognize that the decisions that you make, the policies you enact, the products you create are ultimately going to be resolved at the level of the frontline people who are dealing directly with our customers. Mm-hmm. So instead of trying to get you to empathize with the end user or even the customer, if we can enable you to empathize with the people who deal directly with the customers, your decision-making process and your ultimate customer centricity will be dialed in at a far sharper level. See the difference there?
I do. Yeah, no, that's great. It changes the mental model a little bit. I'm gonna do a quick lightning round. I actually don't usually do these, but I'm gonna do one today with you. We'll see how it goes. So one word that defines great customer experience.
To no surprise, effortlessness.
Figured, yes. A brand that you personally think delivers effortless service.
I'm a golfer, and the single greatest golf resort experience I've ever had was at Bandon Dunes Resort in Oregon. Everything that they do is designed to make you feel like you're in golf heaven, not just because of where you are, but because of who you're working with and the experience that you're having. Nothing's a problem. Everything is effortless. They've thought through everything, and you really feel like you're the first person who ever discovered this great place. And it's one of these experiences that everyone who leaves feels like, wow, I was treated like a real VIP.
Yeah, and that's where I want to go there someday. I've heard wonderful things, and that's what happens when you have effortless service.
You'll never hear anybody who even has even the slightest negative thing to say. It's crazy. Like, how can you achieve universal 5.0-ness? And yet these guys have, and it's because they're humble.
Yep. What's the most overused buzzword in customer success today?
Customer experience, because it means so many different things. It's a monster noun to the extent that two people can be having a conversation about customer experience, and ultimately they have a completely different idea of what they're talking about. We're using the same word, but it's being applied so differently that it's almost like we're not really connecting, even though we're using the same terminology. So again, the experience of the product, the experience of the brand, the experience of the service that I have, if there's a problem or an issue, very different experience.
Define the word. Definitions are important in making sure everyone's on the same page. What's the one metric that every company should track, but usually doesn't?
There you go. Measuring customer effort, the customer effort score. How much effort was required for you to get what you needed from this interaction? And again, that's unique to the exact moment right after an interaction. To assess overall loyalty, the Net Promoter Score question works great. How likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague? But again, that's based on every touch point you've ever had with this company throughout your lifetime.
What frustrates you most as a customer?
The word them. You're going to have to talk to them. I'm sorry, I thought I was talking to your company. No, that's a different department. No, Mileage Plus is different from United Airlines. No, it isn't. It's all the same thing to me. So if you can engineer that word out of the mouths of your frontline people, you're already reducing effort. There's no such thing as them. There's only you. Even if that person you're talking to can't fully resolve your issue, they need to take ownership of that issue, even if it requires other people. There is no them.
Few things make my blood boil more than someone saying, we're going to transfer you to this department, and then transfer me 5 times, and no one knows what's happening. And then I get cut off and I have to start from scratch again.
That's the ultimate high effort experience.
Yes, it's terrible. We didn't really talk about your research process and how you do things. What's your favorite part about the research process in understanding these areas?
Is coming to see how people interpret ideas differently than we might have thought. Again, I mentioned that this idea of effort makes sense to people right away, but often they misinterpret it as being physical effort. But what we discovered is that the way things feel, or the mental effort of resolving an issue, is twice as important. So there's nothing like making an interesting discovery and then finding another light bulb on top of the light bulb. And when you dig a little bit deeper, realizing that there's an even better idea embedded within this first original discovery.
Yeah, that's a great point. What is the hardest truth leaders need to hear about AI?
Is that it's not about replacing your people, but about reallocating your human talent. It's about setting your people up for success by relieving them of the burden of doing the same routine, repetitive stuff that adds no value, so that they can concentrate on things that do add value, like creating human connections, like being able to build better relationships. I mean, the ultimate irony here, Adam, is that AI applied correctly helps your human beings become even more human.
Yeah, that's funny. We tell our team the same thing all the time. And I think people are still worried about that. They're saying, oh, I don't really believe him. Like, look, if you're still copying and pasting information from one thing to the next, that is a low value, not interesting job. And it's one that AI can do better than you. And why would you want to do that? Like, are you enjoying that part of your job? Why would you want to do it? So totally agree with you on that. The question I like to really end on is, if there's a single piece of advice that you can give entrepreneurs to achieve excellence, what would that advice be?
Stop thinking about your customers and start thinking like your customers. And that is very hard to do because your customers have no idea what pressures you're facing, what issues you're dealing with, what your goals and objectives are, what your competitors are doing, what regulatory considerations go into your decision-making, what economic... They don't know any of those things, and they don't care. But unless you're able to, from time to time, take your brain out of your head and put your customer's brain in your head and think with their brain, you'll always be missing something. And again, remember, you're thinking about your business 99% of your waking hours, especially if you're an entrepreneur. Your most raving customer is thinking about your business 0.01% of their time. So that inherent mismatch is what allows people in companies to get away with thinking they're customer-centric when in fact they're not.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's something we all need to... It's sometimes hard to change your mindset and remember to think like the customer, but it is so critical. Rick, it has been a pleasure. I'm glad we did this. I learned a ton. I know our audience will. How can people find you, learn more, get in touch if they want to go deep on this critical element of customer success to building a long-term, sustainable, effortless company?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. Come visit us at glia.com, G-L-I-A, and see exactly how we're changing the whole nature of interactions in this AI era to be able to match the right interaction to the right customer at the right time, time after time. Or personally, just reach out to me through LinkedIn, Rick DeLisi. Always happy to talk to anybody about any of these concepts or to continue this part of the conversation. It's nothing but fun. I've enjoyed every minute of not only our conversation, but this whole career. It's been a truly effortless and astounding experience. And I can't believe I'm lucky enough to have been part of learning these insights that have been so helpful to others.
That is a great way to end in a very positive perspective on life in general. And I think we should all feel that lucky. If you have a chance to work in the job that you love with people you enjoy doing it with, that is a life well lived. Rick, thank you so much for being on today. I appreciate you.
Thanks. Cheers to you. And here's to an effortless life.
Yes.